I went up a very narrow set of stairs leading from the living room to a second floor to use the restroom. When I got to the top of the stairs, I was pushed from behind into a bedroom across from the bathroom. I couldn't see who pushed me. Brett and Mark came into the bedroom and locked the door behind them. There was music playing in the bedroom. It was turned up louder by either Brett or Mark once we were in the room. I was pushed onto the bed, and Brett got on top of me. He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me. I yelled, hoping that someone downstairs might hear me, and I tried to get away from him, but his weight was heavy. Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time. Mark seemed ambivalent, at times urging Brett on, and at times telling him to stop. A couple of times I made eye contact with Mark and thought he might try to help me, but he did not. During this assault, Mark came over and jumped on the bed twice while Brett was on top of me. And the last time that he did this, we toppled over and Brett was no longer on top of me. I was able to get up and run out of the room. Directly across from the bedroom was a small bathroom. I ran inside the bathroom and locked the door. I waited until I heard Brett and Mark leave the bedroom, laughing, and loudly walk down the narrow stairway, pinballing off the walls on the way down. I waited, and when I did not hear them come back up the stairs, I left the bathroom, went down the same stairwell, through the living room, and left the house. I remember being on the street and feeling an enormous sense of relief that I had escaped that house and that Brett and Mark were not coming outside after me.
Dr. Blasey Ford says she doesn't remember a lot of that day, but those memories are indelible. Cecilia, you brought up this point earlier. We know the president watches Fox News. We know he takes political cues from the analysts on Fox News. Many times he's retweeted the legal analyst Andrew Napolitano, who's just gone on Fox News and said that he sees the witness coming off as exceptionally credible right now. This is something we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, but there may be a shift in some way that's happening on Fox News right now. At least one anchor, Chris Wallace, says, quote, this is a disaster for Republicans. And he's been talking about, according to Juju Chang, who's reporting that Chris Wallace says 2 of his daughters shared similar incidents that happened to them in high school. And this just goes back to this cultural moment that we are living in right now. That hashtag, why didn't I report? Nearly 800,000 people coming forward. People reportedly calling into C-SPAN, telling stories of them being assaulted. And I certainly know in my own world, the friends and the conversations I have had with family in the wake of this debate that's happening, and people telling stories of things that happened to them in high school and college that they never felt empowered before until that happening right now. And I will say, I'm sitting here in this desk in New York, and I'm following this on Twitter, of course, but you know, you see a division. You see a division between men and women as we listen to this testimony today, and you see a division, the same division that exists so strongly in our country right now, of people whose minds have already been made up coming in to watch this testimony. If you are Trump Kavanaugh camp, many people think that there is nothing she can say to change their minds, and exactly the opposite on the other side. So I don't know that no matter what happens in there today, differently. She may not, and he may not be changing minds of people watching this.
That is true. We are as divided and as hard partisan camps as we have ever, or as we've been in a long, long time. But Cokie Roberts, again, at the beginning of this, we all knew coming in this would be not just a political moment, but a cultural moment. That is clearly happening.
Very clearly happening. And again, partly because of the just normalcy of this woman, Dr. Blasey Ford. She just seems so much like the girl next door. And despite the fact that clearly the Republican argument is to try to make her look like a Democratic tool, the fact that the prosecutor, who is trying to be kindly and homey herself, but she said to her, why didn't you talk to any Republican congressman? You just went to your own congressman, Anna Eshoo, who's a Democrat. So that's going to be their strategy, but she is so credible that women are responding, and it's a response that, I mean, my tweets today are all from women saying, this is just unbelievable. This is finally someone saying what we've been wanting to say. And if people feel that she's giving them voice, that's very difficult for Republicans.
It's very, very powerful, I think. I mean, I spent my career listening to women telling me these types of stories over and over and over again. And if you look at the statistics are there of the sexual violence crimes not reported to police between 2005 and 2010, which is very recent, actually. The victim gave these reasons for not reporting. 20% feared retaliation. 13% believed the police would not do anything. 13% believed it was a personal matter. 8% believed it wasn't important enough to report, and 7% did not want to get the perpetrator in trouble. I think we're seeing a real sea change. It was very difficult to prosecute these cases in the 90s, in the 80s, 2000s, but we're seeing something very different. And you see the hashtag, you know, why I didn't report. I think there are going to be many, many women that see themselves in Dr. Ford.
Can I just add, though, I mean, I do think that is the case, and that is certainly happening, but going into the White House every day, that is not happening on the grounds and inside this White House. You don't see minds being changed. I don't think you see the sensitivity of this cultural conversation happening with the president himself, because he's facing all of these accusers.
Well, and that's the thing. The president goes at it from a very particular point of view.
Yes,
he said that yesterday.
His personal experience.
Who's had that, and that's what I want to bring to John Karl as well. John, you know, the president has not been comfortable with the strategy of basically deferring to everything that Mitch McConnell wants on this nomination, to be silent for the most part, to let them do the job, to let them ram this through. Do you think it's conceivable at some point that as these reports come in, that the president will take matters into his own hands, or is he still willing to defer to the Senate?
I think the president has been upset about how this process has played out from the beginning. He wanted to push for an earlier vote. It is his style, as you well know. When accusations come out, you forcefully come out and you counterpunch, you counterattack. He watched the interview that Brett Kavanaugh did on Fox News Channel and felt that it was ineffective because Kavanaugh was not as forceful as the president thought he should have been in making the denials. And I would be very surprised that the president watch how this played out, particularly the way the Republicans have ceded the questioning to somebody else and not come out of this deeply unhappy with how this has gone. I thought the president was very disciplined in some ways yesterday in an otherwise very undisciplined press conference in not taking on directly the accusers. I asked him directly, are they liars? Yeah. And he would not go there.
And that's exactly right. And Mary Bruce, I know we're about to see on the Democratic side, at least, the questions coming from those most interested in replacing President Trump.
Yeah, when you think about who's still left to question, Senator Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, some of the fiercest questioners on this panel, and two people who also happen to be eyeing a run for the White House as well. And also, Senator Blasey Ford just walked behind us, and she has been incredibly vocal in her criticism of the politics around this entire process. She still has left to ask her questions as well. In fact, at one point a few days ago, she used a profanity when talking with us to describe how she thinks it's ridiculous that Republicans Republicans, in her point of view, have not been calling for an FBI investigation. And just a reminder to everyone of the state of play here. This hearing is still, or this committee, excuse me, is still slated to have a vote on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination tomorrow morning. I have been asking lawmakers as they leave the hearing room and walk in this hallway behind me whether or not they feel that needs to be delayed. No one is saying that they feel it needs to continue right now. In fact, remember, Chairman Grassley told our John Parkinson earlier that the testimony is something that he definitely needs to sleep on.
Mary, you may not have an answer to this, but we all know that Mitch McConnell has an iron grip on his caucus, on his Republican Senate caucus. He held them together by not even allowing a hearing or any kind of consideration of Merrick Garland throughout the entire last year of President Obama's presidency. Any reaction so far to how his senators are doing or how Dr. Blasey Ford is doing?
I mean, Mitch McConnell is in an incredibly tricky position here. I mean, just a few days ago, he came out and said, quote, "We will win," that he thinks that he is confident that Judge Kavanaugh will be confirmed. And yet so many members of his own caucus, it's clear, are taking this testimony seriously. Those key Republican senators that we've been watching so carefully over the last few weeks and days, Murkowski, Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, who's sitting on this committee today, clearly have serious reservations about this. And of course, it only takes 2 no votes to sink Kavanaugh's nomination. How will Mitch McConnell navigate the rest of this day? The coming days after this is going to be really interesting to watch.
I think the Democrats who might have been on the fence, who, was sort of first when Blasey Ford came out, went against Kavanaugh, now then got a little wobbly as
Joe
more
Manchin
people, Joe
Virginia.
Manchin of West Virginia, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. But the fact is, I think this will shore them up. So then it does get to those 2 Republican women and maybe Jeff Flake. But the other thing I'm sure they're doing is running, tracking polls as this is going on. And what they've had so much trouble with, and the polls going into today, showing the women, even Republican women, not as much behind Kavanaugh as Republican men.
The question is, will he be able to start to turn that around and stem that tide when he has his chance?
But they've got elections to worry about. This is not just about the Supreme Court nomination. They've got to worry about what happens in 6 weeks.
Terry Moran?
Well, they do have to worry about elections, and they also have to worry about this cultural moment, which feeds into that. However, I am reminded, having covered the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings myself, how that day went. Anita Hill took the stand with her strength of character, her poise, her courage in spelling out at a very different time in the mores of our country explicit things that she said had happened to her, and the sense was game over. There's no way Clarence Thomas becomes the Justice of the Supreme Court.
That's true, and I remember that time well as well, Terry, but the difference was that at the end of that testimony, the public believed him, not her.
That's it. But we were a different country then, weren't we? I think people do forget that fact, George, which is that polls immediately afterwards showed, oddly, that almost by a 2-to-1, or not oddly, I suppose, depends on one's point of view. By a 2-to-1 margin, the public found Clarence Thomas more believable than Anita Hill. Now it's completely shifted. And there was no difference, very little difference between men and women. It was partisanship, and it was where the public was on that. But also, it was a different country. People were just learning about these issues, which we are hearing so eloquently from our colleagues and on our Twitter feeds and our families about this is a moment of reckoning, again, 20-some years later, that I don't think can be ignored this time.
And, David, you're in that room in that Senate Judiciary Committee right now. Only 3 members there. The chairman, Senator Grassley, the ranking Republican, Senator Hatch, and Senator Leahy, the ranking Democrat, who were actually on the committee during the Anita Hill hearings.
And as you mentioned, George, still ahead in these hearings are the folks who perhaps have 2020 dreams of at least running for the presidency. I'm also struck by the number of senators up here on the Hill who are watching in their offices, equally as close as the senators obviously in that room. There's been so much attention paid to the Democrats up for re-election in states that Donald Trump won handily in red states. But the focus has really turned as this week has worn on, and particularly with the testimony today, to these Republicans. Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. There were protests outside her office all this week. The pressure is mounting for them. Jeff Flake, who said just a short time ago that he is still listening to her every word, has not made up his mind. And George, we saw that quote from Lisa Murkowski earlier this week, and I thought it said it all about where her head was at going into today's hearing. She said, we are in a place where it's not about whether or not Judge Kavanaugh is qualified. It's about whether or not, as a woman who has been a victim at some point in her life, will be believed. And that was the thought that she delivered heading into this hearing.
And so far, no one has wanted to say that they don't find her credible.
So we've been talking about how the senators are watching this, how the president is watching this, how the public is watching this. What about how Brett Kavanaugh is watching this right now? Okay,
in Mike Pence's office.
Exactly. With advisors there talking about moment by moment how this has got to impact exactly how Brett Kavanaugh goes about testifying. And I've got to believe that they are saying to him, you are going to have to be outraged, you're going to have to be tough, you're going to have to be vociferous in your denials of this, you're going to have people believe that everything is at stake for you. It's the only
That's what
way.
worked for Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see something similar here because he's not going to be able to talk about the specifics. He's going to have to talk about how he feels.
With Clarence Thomas, there was the element of race. And so what you had was him talking about a high-tech lynching. Right. And when you had that got a lot of the African-American community behind
Generally
him.
Democrats.
Generally Democrats. And that is a really different situation. I don't know what Brett Kavanaugh can bring to the table that's like a high-tech lynching.
And I do also wonder how Prosecutor Mitchell is going to handle his questioning, because the one thing that I have found irreconcilable with the portrait that he painted for himself and of himself in the Fox News interview, which was, I was a student athlete, most concerned with community service and going to church. Well, there are a lot of questions about his alcohol usage. He outlines things in his yearbook. Is she going to question him about those things?
Wait, let's listen to Bob Corker right now, Republican senator.
But again, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to make comments until it's over. Based on what you've seen, do you think that there should still be a committee vote tomorrow? Again, I'll wait until I see the whole thing, but thank you for your...
Do you find her credible so
Wants
far?
no part of that right now. Some of the people have been wondering whether Corker was fully committed to voting for Kavanaugh going into this. Cecilia, Dan brings up the point that Kavanaugh's going to be surrounded by advisors who are going to be urging him to be forceful, to be strong, as the president had wanted as well. But we do know from some reporting on his practice sessions coming into this, picks up on Sonny's point, that when he was started to be asked about about drinking, about other kinds of activity, about the yearbook, not excited about answering him, that's when he would get irritated and bristle.
Yeah, exactly. But we also know that these practice sessions went on and on and on, and he is probably getting them right now behind the scenes. I just don't know how he comes out at this point and responds directly to the testimony that has been laid out.
Let's just, I'm sorry, we have Senator Leahy. No, he wanted to walk by too.
The question right now is, I think, will the Republicans and this White House particularly, how will they respond to this public pressure? As we are all watching this and seeing this cultural moment mount, much more so today, I think, even than it has in the days leading up to this.
Agree.
How can they possibly vote on this tomorrow? And what is the White House going to say when they are faced with this question? So far, they don't have a comment, and I don't know that they can get away with not commenting on this in the next few hours.
The flip side, John Carl, and the reason they've wanted to rush this through so badly is that Republicans know that Democrats remember what happened to Merrick Garland, that he was not allowed to even get a hearing throughout the last year of President Obama's presidency. We're already at the point now where if for some reason Brett Kavanaugh had to withdraw, it's virtually impossible that you could have a replacement in before the elections. And then you face the prospect, perhaps, that Democrats, the majority flips, and President Trump at least has the prospect of not getting a second pick.
Absolutely, and we've heard from Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, worried about how the midterms are looking in terms of the Senate. That remember, it's a one-seat Republican majority. They face a very favorable map in the midterm elections, but it is not inconceivable that the Democrats could gain control of the Senate and face exactly that. Denying a chance to have President Trump nominate a second Supreme Court justice.
For 2 years, though?
That's the question.
We're not talking about the possibility that for 2 years?
Well, but maybe you then send up a different type of nominee.
Exactly. Well, that becomes the issue. But then the question becomes, will this president negotiate, right? Because that's the way past presidents have done it. They've negotiated with the Senate. They've said, is this person acceptable? Is this person acceptable? I don't know that well, that's my point. And now imagine that that's a Democratic Senate. I don't know that President Trump would be willing to do that, and then you really do have a stalemate.
Well, I think they're also very, very worried about their base. I mean, what you had last week in Washington was the Values Voters Summit there, with everybody there ginning up the Republicans pro-Kavanaugh. And don't you dare step back from him, and don't you dare in any way seem like you're not going to go.
Well, and that gets to the question of if for some reason, and again, we have not heard from Brett Kavanaugh yet, but if for some reason this would not go forward, is the reaction on the Republican side, oh, this is the reason we have to come out and fight in the midterms, or is defeat, and we are going to give up?
Right. That we obviously don't know the answer.
Terry Moran?
This seat that Justice Anthony Kennedy occupied is a swing vote, sometimes going with liberals, sometimes with conservatives, more often with conservatives. This is the crown jewel of Republican politics for the better part of the last half century. The court shifting it to the right decisively has been one of the things that unites all Republicans, and that in fact has driven them to the polls. It's one of the main reasons Donald Trump is president of the United States. They are not going to back down. There's a lame duck session in between the election and the new Congress, which will come after the first of the year. They'll confirm Trump's nominee then, and they'll ram it through. They are livid about the way this process has unfolded. If Kavanaugh does withdraw, they're going to steamroll that.
And that is going to get to the question, too, John Carl, of who they are going to blame. Do they blame the president? Do they blame the Republican leadership in the Senate? Do they blame Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, I think that the first question is, who's the president going to blame on this? I think publicly you will see him, if this goes down, launch an attack on Democrats. You will also hear him, perhaps publicly as well, blame how Republicans led this. But what I am hearing by folks close to the president is that he is unhappy with his own team that helped him guide this confirmation process. Don McGahn, his White House counsel, Leonard Leo, with the Federalist Society, they strongly pushed him in the direction of picking Brett Kavanaugh. And I think that what I am hearing is that he is upset that they didn't know about this.
And you started to hear some early, even before today's hearing, John Carl, some rumblings behind the scenes. Oh, Brett Kavanaugh is a Bush guy. We don't pick Bush guys. This is not the guy that I wanted, and that's getting a little louder.
Absolutely, and there were two other names in place. One of those was Amy Coney Barrett, who obviously a woman, somebody who was seen as the choice of the right, and somebody that Trump was tempted to pick, was seen as a riskier pick because she is very, very conservative. Another finalist was Thomas Hardiman, who the president, our understanding is the president's own sister, the judge, was in favor of. And he was pushed in the direction of Brett Kavanaugh on the idea that Brett Kavanaugh would be easier to confirm and would be a reliable conservative vote, but one who is easier to confirm. By the way, on Terry's point, Terry, if I can disagree a little bit, what I am hearing in terms of a lame duck confirmation, even Republican leaders, people, pushing for this, pushing hard for this, think that the idea of getting a different nominee through on a lame duck is virtually impossible.
The Democrats will find a way to stop. To pick up on one of the points John is making, Cecilia, Don McGahn, the president's counsel, who we know was a strong ally of Kavanaugh, probably the hardest person pushing for him inside. He was supposed to leave the White House right after the midterms elections, right after Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed. This is, again, if you look ahead to the possibility after the midterms that they might have to go through this again, it's going to be done with an entirely new team in the White House and all kinds of other changes.
Well-oiled machine, George. I mean, that's the go-to line for them. They've got everything in place. But, the president, John Carl, is exactly right. President Trump, I guarantee, will come out swinging on this one, and he will be pointing blame. And on the reverse side, the Republicans will quietly and privately point blame right back at him. They will say, and I've spoken with sources leading up to this, that he didn't stick to the plan on this. He was not supposed to get involved. Mitch McConnell Patel had been asking him repeatedly to sort of stay out of this one, and then that tweet on Friday, he had been measured until that point, and in the days since then, sort of measured, but he didn't stay out of it, and he used those words that really seemed to be bashing Christine Blasey Ford and really taking Kavanaugh's side. And Republicans are going to point blame at him and say that he added fuel to the fire on this one and didn't really help the cause.
Can I mention this? I mean, I know a few of you are saying that Kavanaugh wasn't his choice, but Trump's choice. But if you think about it, Kavanaugh wrote that presidents shouldn't be distracted by criminal investigations. No doubt in my mind that President Trump chose him for this, as Trump views the Mueller probe as some sort of a burden. Right. And so the notion that he doesn't want Kavanaugh, I think may be a little bit misguided, because why not have someone that doesn't believe a president should be impeached?
Well, he's going to claim he doesn't want him. I mean, you know, if this goes down, I think the argument, right, is that he's going to say, I was never, you know, really sold.
Okay, Roberts, I grew up in the political world where rapid response meant within the same news cycle, maybe 8 or 10 hours. Just got this from Senator Hatch's spokesperson.
Yes, I was just about to say it as well.
Hatch uses attractive to describe personalities, not appearances. If you search his past quotes, you'll see he's used it consistently for years for men and women.
Right. I was just about to say the same thing, since Senator Hatch, I'm the person who brought up the attractive, and we did get that response immediately.
Let's hear Senator Leahy.
Bring forward the other 2 women who made these complaints. Why have they refused to bring forward Mr. Judge, who was somebody says sitting out there at a beach house? And why haven't they done the background check with the FBI that we always do? Did they learn nothing from the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill matter? Nothing?
What are you looking to hear from Judge Kavanaugh?
Well, we'll see what he says. Right now we have very compelling witnesses in this took place, and we have the Republicans refusing to bring in the 3rd person who was there. It makes you wonder what he can say.
Should you guys still hold a vote this on Friday? Should you still hold
they're rushing. Listen, this thing is being rushed more than I've ever seen before in my years here. Even with Clarence Thomas, we stopped long enough to get FBI report done. We've got 2 other women have come forward. You have an eyewitness to what happened. You have no FBI background. Take a couple of weeks. What difference does it make? We're talking about a lifetime appointment. And these are the people that held up Merrick Garland, a highly qualified person, for over a year. What's the rush? If you're not trying to hide anything, why rush?
But you've heard Republican leaders, they're insistent that they want to hold this vote soon. What gives you any indication that they're going to delay?
Well, I don't have any. I mean, they want to hold it. All the testimony and the evidence that's coming out is harmful to Kavanaugh. I suspect they don't want any more to come out.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Mary Bruce, while you're there, we just heard you talking to Senator Leahy right there, and the Democrats have a pretty consistent talking point that they should move quickly on this. And on the Republican side, we spent a lot of time talking about those 3 senators we talked about at the beginning: Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Jeff Flake. I'm interested, though, in something just coming in from Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican of West Virginia, answering a question from saying that she finds Dr. Ford's testimony riveting.
Yeah, and that is incredibly interesting to hear that coming from her as well. Look, Republicans, from their reaction so far, has been very careful, very cautious. It's notable how many are simply not commenting yet. They're waiting to hear the rest of today play out, see, of course, what Judge Kavanaugh has to say as well. And look, you have even some of Judge Kavanaugh's most ardent supporters, like Orrin Hatch, saying, and I quote, "I don't find her uncredible." I'll let you digest that one. But you also have folks like Senator Ted Cruz, who's on the panel, who, of course, is in a tight re-election race right now, saying that it's important that Dr. Ford was heard, but also saying that it's important that Kavanaugh be heard, too. Republicans right now, many of them seeming to reserve judgment, but also interesting that not only are we, of course, focused on those key swing votes, but you are also hearing clearly some reservations from some other Republicans as well.
And Cecilia Vega, more reaction now from the White House on background.
Yeah, this is coming in from our Justin Fischel in Washington, who's reporting that a senior White House official tells him this seems like a situation of emotion versus fact. So this is the spin, at least for now, coming out of the White House, the early spin. This official telling Justin Fischel our testimony is emotional and compelling. Her testimony, rather, is emotional and compelling, but she has very significant gaps in her memory. And, of course, this official is raising questions about whether this will change Republican minds, and we will right now see.
But then when asked if the White House was happy with the prosecutor's performance,
wouldn't go that far.
Would not go that far. Dr. Blasey Ford is back in the hearing room right now, flanked by her attorney, Michael Bromwich. As we said, about 10 senators left to question Dr. Blasey Ford. She's smiling now, has had moments of emotion all through this hearing. Seems to tear up most when being praised by senators and thank the senators for coming forward. We will see now in this afternoon whether they stick with the strategy of having Rachel Mitchell ask the questions of Dr. Ford. As Mary Bruce reported earlier, some of the most vociferous Democrats ready to ask questions. Senator Grassley asking if Dr. Ford is ready.
I'm just organizing my papers. I'll be ready.
Look how much more relaxed she seems now than at the beginning of this proceeding.
You know, she said she was terrified at the beginning, but all through that, yes, she seems relaxed now. And Koki, you were making this point earlier. All through that, in some ways, incredibly natural.
Totally. Completely natural. And that makes it much harder to paint her as some sort of tool who has been put forward by the liberal elites. You know.
And she just said she's ready. Let's listen.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, is it your intent to cede all Republican senators' time to your prosecutor rather than they themselves ceding their time to her?
Yes.
We all know that the prosecutor, even though this clearly is not a criminal proceeding, is asking Dr. Ford all kinds of questions about what happened before and after, but basically not during the attack. The prosecutor should know that sexual assault survivors often do not remember peripheral information such as what happened before or after the traumatic event. And yet she will persist in asking these questions, all to undermine the memory and basically the credibility of Dr. Ford. But we all know Dr. Ford's memory of the assault is very clear. Dr. Ford, the Republicans prosecutor has asked you all kinds of questions about who you called and when, asking details that would be asked in a cross-examination of a witness in a criminal trial. But this is not a criminal proceeding. This is a confirmation proceeding. I think I know what she's trying to get at. So I'll just ask you very plainly, Dr. Ford, is there a political motivation for your coming forward with your account of the assault by Brett Kavanaugh?
No, and I'd like to reiterate that, again, I was trying to get the information to you while there was still a list of other, what looked like equally qualified candidates.
And yet they're not here to testify. Dr. Ford, I'd like to join my colleagues who have thanked you for coming forward today. And we all admire you for what you're doing. And I understand why you have come forward. You wanted us and the American people to know what you knew about the character of the man we are considering for a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. I want to take a moment also to note the significant personal sacrifices you've made to come forward to share your traumatic experience with us and the American people. You've had to move, you've had death threats, all manner of basically re-victimization experiences have come your ways. But by coming forward, you have inserted the question of character into this nomination and hopefully back into American life, and rightly so. We should be made to face the question of who it is we are putting in positions of power and decision-making in this country. We should look the question square in the face. Does character matter? Do our values, our real values about what is right and what is wrong, and about whether we treat our fellow human beings with dignity and respect, do they matter anymore? I believe they do. And I believe the reaction we have seen to this coverage right now and your courage all over this country shows us that we're not alone. You're not alone. That women and men all across America are disgusted and sick and tired of the way basic human decency has been driven from our public life. The president admits on tape to assaulting women. He separates children from their parents. He takes basic health care protections from those who need them most. He nominates and stands behind a man who stands credibly accused of a horrible act. I again want to thank you for coming forward. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that on 6 items consisting of various statements, letters, fact sheet, posts are inserted into the record.
Is that one request, or you want me to wait for 6?
Well, I have 6 separate items.
Okay.
They consist. I can go over them for you.
Okay, no.
I would like to.
Let me not interrupt you.
Okay.
Your request is accepted without objection.
Thank you. And I would like to read from an item that has already been entered into the record, but this is from a letter from the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. The letter states, and I quote this letter, "This moment has become a crucible. It's a test of our progress. Do we start by believing victims of sexual assault and treating them with dignity, or don't we? So far, Senate leaders are failing that test, prejudging the outcome of the hearing, sympathizing with her perpetrator, attacking her credibility. They send a message to every victim of sexual violence that their pain doesn't matter, that they do not deserve justice, and that for them, fair treatment is out of reach. This will only serve to drive victims into the shadows and further embolden abusers." Once again, Dr. Ford, thank you very much. This is a moment for our country. Mahalo.
Senator, Ms. Mitchell for Senator Crapo.
Good afternoon. Hi. When we left off, we were still talking about the polygraph, and I believe you said it hasn't been paid for yet. Is that correct?
Let me put an end to this mystery. Her lawyers have paid for her polygraph.
As is routine.
As is routine.
Dr. Ford, do you expect the price of that polygraph to be passed on to you?
I'm not sure yet. I haven't taken a look at all of the costs involved in this. We've relocated now twice, so I haven't kept track of all of that paperwork, but I'm sure I have a lot of work to do to catch up on all of that later.
I get you have a lot going on, and you've had that for several months. But is it your understanding that someone else is going to assist you with some of these fees, including the cost for your polygraph?
I'm aware that there's been several GoFundMe sites that I haven't had a chance to figure out how to manage those because I've never had one
and I'm sorry,
done for me.
Several what?
GoFundMe sites that have raised money primarily for our security detail. So I'm not even quite sure how to collect that money and how to distribute it yet. I haven't been able to focus on that.
Okay. In your testimony this morning, you stated that Senator Feinstein sent you a letter on August 31st of this year. Is that right?
August 31st. Let me see. I sent her a letter on July 30th, and I don't have the date. I'd have to pull up my email to find out the date of her email to me saying that it was right before the hearings that she was going to maintain the confidentiality of the letter.
Say that again. It was till right before the hearings.
That's my memory, but I can look it up for you if you would like the exact date. I could pull it up on my email.
Oh, yeah. I want to make sure.
Counsel?
I want to make sure I understood what you said.
That document's been turned over to, in response to a request for documents. You have it.
Thank you, counsel. I want to make sure I understood what you said. Was it your understanding it was going to be kept confidential up until right before the hearing?
It was my understanding that it was going to be kept confidential, period.
Period? Okay. Between your polygraph on August the 7th and your receipt of the letter from Senator Feinstein, did you or anyone on your behalf speak to any member of Congress or congressional staff about these allegations?
I personally did not.
So my question was, did you or anybody on your behalf?
What do you mean? Did someone speak for me?
Somebody that is working with you or helping you, did somebody at your behest, on your behalf, speak to somebody in Congress or a staff?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure how those exchanges went, but I didn't speak to anyone.
Okay. Is it possible that somebody did?
I think so. It would be possible. I'm guessing it would be possible, but I don't know.
Okay.
Excuse me, you've asked her not to guess, and now you're asking her what's possible. So I think if you want to ask her what she knows, you should ask her what she knows.
Is that an objection, counsel?
It is.
I'll have the chair rule on that.
I don't know what I don't understand.
Unless there's a legal reason for not answering it, on advice of your counsel.
So I don't totally understand the question, but I didn't speak with anyone during that time frame other than my counsel.
Okay. You've said repeatedly that you did not think that that letter that you wrote on July 30th was going to be released to the public. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And is it true that you did not authorize it to be released at any time?
Correct.
Okay. Besides your attorneys, did you provided that letter to Senator Feinstein, is that correct?
I provided her a letter on July 30th.
We're talking about the July 30th letter.
Okay.
And you provided that letter to Senator Feinstein, correct? Is that a yes?
Yes.
And you provided the letter to Representative Eshoo to deliver to Senator Feinstein?
Yes.
Besides those two individuals, Representative Eshoo and Senator Feinstein, and your attorneys, did you provide that letter to anyone else?
No.
Do you know how that letter became public?
No.
After that letter was made public or leaked, did you reach back out to the Washington Post?
I reached out to the Washington, well, they were continuously reaching out to me, and I was not responding. But the time that I did respond and agree to do the sit down was once the reporters started showing up at my home and at my workplace.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ford, thank you for being here. I just want to remind everyone that this is not a courtroom. This is not a legal proceeding. You are here under your own volition. And though the prosecutor has been engaged here to represent my colleagues, you're here, as you said, out of a civic duty. And I want to join my colleagues that it's really more than that. You know, our founding documents talk about civic duty. Our Declaration of Independence talks about, for this country, pledging your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. And anybody who's read your testimony knows what you've had to sacrifice by coming forward. Your life has been upended. You have received vicious, hateful threats, death threats. You've had to move out of your family home to some expense, I imagine, to you and your family. You've had to engage security to some expense. You've had to deal with incredible challenges. And what's amazing, and I want to join my colleagues in thanking you for your courage and bravery in coming forward, all to help us deal with one of the most important obligations a senator has, to advise and consent on one of the branches of our government, the highest courts in the land, an individual going before a lifetime appointment. And you even said that the president had a lot of folks on that list, and your fear was that this individual, who assaulted you would ascend to that seat. That's correct, right?
Correct.
Yes, and it is correct that you have given a lot of resources, taken a lot of threats to come forward, correct?
Correct.
Assaults on your dignity and your humanity?
Absolutely.
How has it affected your children?
They're doing fairly well considering. Thank you for asking.
And your husband?
Doing fairly well considering. Yeah, thank you. We have a very supportive community.
That's good to hear. I want to use a different word for your courage because this is more, as much as this hearing is about a Supreme Court justice, the reality is by you coming forward, your courage, you are affecting the culture of our country. We have a wonderful nation, an incredible culture, but there are dark elements that allow unconscionable levels of, unacceptable levels of sexual assault and harassment that are affecting girls and boys and affecting men and women, from big media outlets to corporations to factory floors to servers in restaurants to our intimate spaces and homes and apartments all around this country. I stepped out during the break and was deluged with notes from friends all around the country, social media posts, that there are literally hundreds of thousands of people watching your testimony right now. And note after note that I got, people in tears, feeling pain and anguish, not just feeling your pain, but feeling their own, who have not come forward. You are opening up to open air hurt and pain that goes on across this country. And for that, the word I would use, it's nothing short of heroic. Because what you're doing for our nation right now, besides giving testimony germane to one of the most sacred obligations of our offices, is you are speaking truth that this country needs to understand. And how we deal with survivors who come forward right now is unacceptable. And the way we deal with this, unfortunately, allows for the continued darkness of this culture to exist. And your brilliance, shining light onto this, speaking your truth, is nothing short of heroic. But to the matter at hand, one of my colleagues who I have a lot of respect for, and I do consider him a friend, went to the Senate floor and spoke truth to both sides of the political aisle. Senator Flake said yesterday, this is a lifetime appointment, and this is said to be a deliberative body. In the interest of due diligence and fairness, her claims must be fully aired and considered. I agree with him. But you've asked for things that would give a full airing, from corroborating witnesses to be called. You've submitted to an intrusive polygraph test. Can you answer for me, how do you feel that all the things that could have been done thoroughly to help this deliberative body have not been honored in this so-called investigation?
I wish that I could be more helpful and that others could be more helpful and that we could collaborate in a way that would get at more information.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to introduce for the record 7 letters from Lambda Legal, from Mormon Women for Ethical Government, youth-led organizations around this country, the international unions, bricklayers, allied craft workers, a letter from 295 survivors of sexual violence in support of Dr. Ford, and a letter from 1,600 men. It's a campaign in support of Dr. Ford, and those who want to assert, men and women, that survivors of sexual violence are not opportunists, do not have political axes to grind, but are coming forward with courage and with heart to speak their truth and try to end the scourge of sexual assault and violence in our country.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Tillis, Ms. Mitchell for Senator Tillis.
Dr. Ford, in choosing attorneys, did anyone help you with the choice on who to choose?
Various people referred me to lawyers that they knew in the Washington, D.C. area. So as you know, I grew up in this area, so I asked some family members and friends, and they referred me to like divorce attorneys that might know somebody that might know somebody, and I ended up interviewing several law firms from the D.C. area.
And did anybody besides friends and family refer you to any attorneys?
I think that the staff of Dianne Feinstein's office suggested the possibility of some attorneys.
Okay. Including the two that are sitting on either side of you?
Not both of them, no.
Okay. We've heard a lot about FBI investigations. When did you personally first request an FBI investigation?
How many weeks ago? I guess when we first started talking about the possibility of a hearing, I was hoping that there would be a more thorough investigation.
Would that investigation have been something that you would have submitted to an interview?
I would be happy to cooperate with the FBI, yes.
Would you have been happy to submit to an interview by staff members from this committee?
Absolutely.
Okay. Besides, you mentioned some GoFundMe accounts. Besides those, are there any other efforts outside of your own personal finances to pay for your legal fees or any of the costs incurred?
It's my understanding that some of my team is working on a pro bono basis, but I don't know the exact details. And there are members of the community in Palo Alto that have the means to contribute to help me with the security detail, et cetera.
Have you been provided?
I think I can help you with that. Both counsel are doing this pro bono. We are not being paid, and we have no expectation of being paid.
Thank you, counsel. Have you seen any of the questions that I was going to ask you today?
No.
Have you've been asked a few questions by other people as well. Have you seen any of those questions in advance?
No.
Have you been told them in advance?
No.
And likewise with my questions, have you been told my questions in advance?
Definitely not.
Okay. You mentioned about some possible information, such as when Mark Judge worked at the supermarket. I want to ask you about someone else. You mentioned that there was a classmate who was really sort of the connection between you and Brett Kavanaugh. Who was this person?
I think that case with Mr. Whalen, who was looking at my LinkedIn page and then trying to blame the person, I just don't feel like it's right for us to be talking about that.
I'm not trying to blame anybody. I just want to know who the common friend that you and...
The person that Mr. Whalen was trying to say looked like Mr. Kavanaugh.
Okay. How long did you know this person?
Maybe for a couple of months we socialized, but he also was a member of the same country club, and I knew his younger brother as well.
Okay. So a couple months before this took place?
Yes.
Okay. How would you characterize your relationship with him both before and after this took place, this person?
He was somebody that we used the phrase I went out with. I wouldn't say date. I went out with for a few months. That was how we termed it at the time. And after that, we were distant friends and ran into each other periodically at Columbia Country Club, but I didn't see him often. But I saw his brother and him several times.
Was this person the only common link between you and Judge Kavanaugh?
He's the only one that I would be able to name right now that I would like to not name, but you know who I mean. But there are certainly other members of Columbia Country Club that were common friends, or they were more acquaintances of mine and friends of Mr. Kavanaugh.
Okay. Can you describe all of the other social interactions that you had with Mr. Kavanaugh?
Briefly, yes, I can. There were, during freshman and sophomore year, particularly my sophomore year, which would have been his junior year of high school, 4 to 5 parties that my friends and I attended that were attended also by him.
Okay. Did anything happen at these events? like we're talking about? Besides the time we're talking about?
You can answer that question, then I'll go to Senator Harris. Go ahead and answer that question.
There was no sexual assault at any of those events. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, those were just parties.
Or anything inappropriate is what I'm asking.
Maybe we can go into more detail when there's more time. I feel time pressure on that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator.
Happy to answer in further detail if you want me to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish answering your question.
Oh, okay. Did you want me to describe those parties? Or
Should we leave this to the next round, Mr. Chairman?
Answer the question.
I'm just happy to describe them if you wanted me to, and I'm happy to not. It's just whatever you want.
Maybe this will
whatever is your preference.
Cut to the chase. My question is, was there anything else that was sexually inappropriate, any inappropriate sexual behavior on the part of Mr. Kavanaugh towards you at any of these other functions?
No.
Okay.
Senator Harris.
Dr. Ford, first of all, just so we can level set, you know you are not on trial. You are not on trial. You are sitting here before members of the United States Senate's Judiciary Committee because you had the courage to come forward because, as you have said, you believe it was your civic duty. I was struck in your testimony by what you indicated as your intention when you first let anyone associated with these hearings know about it. And what you basically said is you reached out to your representative in the United States Congress, hoping that person would inform the White House before Judge Kavanaugh had been named. That's extremely persuasive about your motivation for coming forward. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your courage, and I want to tell you I believe you. I believe you. And I believe many Americans across this country believe you. And what I find striking about your testimony is you remember key, searing details of what happened to you. You told your husband and therapist, two of the most intimate of your confidants, and you told them years ago about this assault. You have shared your experience with multiple friends years after that and before these hearings ever started. I know, having personally prosecuted sexual assault cases and child sexual assault cases, that study after study shows trauma, shame, and the fear of consequences almost always cause survivors to, at the very least, delay reporting if they ever report at all. Police recognize that. Prosecutors recognize that. Medical and mental health professionals recognize that. The notes from your therapy sessions were created long before this nomination and corroborate what you have said today. You have passed a polygraph and submitted the results to this committee. Judge Kavanaugh has not. You have called for outside witnesses to testify and for expert witnesses to testify. Judge Kavanaugh has not. But most importantly, you have called for an independent FBI investigation into the facts. Judge Kavanaugh has not. And we owe you that. We owe the American people that. And let's talk about why this is so important. Contrary to what has been said today, the FBI does not reach conclusions. The FBI investigates. It interviews witnesses, gathers facts, and then presents that information to the United States Senate for our consideration and judgment. This committee knows that, in spite of what you've been told. In 1991, during a similar hearing, one of my Republican colleagues in this committee stated these claims were taken seriously by having the Federal Bureau of Investigations launch an inquiry to determine their validity. The FBI fulfilled its duty and issued a confidential report. Well, that could have and should have been done here. This morning, it was said that this could have been investigated confidentially back in July. But this also could have been investigated in the last 11 days since you came forward. Yet that has not happened. The FBI could have interviewed Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, you and Judge Kavanaugh on these issues. The FBI could have examined various maps that have been presented by the prosecutor who stands in for the United States senators on this committee. The FBI could have gathered facts about the music or the conversation or any other details about the gathering that occurred that evening. That is standard procedure in a sexual assault case. In fact, the manual that was signed off by Ms. Mitchell, the manual that is posted on the Maricopa County Attorney's website as a guiding principle and best practices for what should happen with sexual assault cases, highlights the details of what should happen in terms of the need for an objective investigation into any sexual assault case. It says, quote, effective investigation requires cooperation with a multidisciplinary team that includes medical professionals, victim advocates, dedicated forensic interviewers, criminalists, and other law enforcement members. The manual also stresses the importance of obtaining outside witness information. You have bravely come forward. You have bravely come forward. And I want to thank you because you clearly have nothing to gain for what you have done. You have been a true patriot in fighting for the best of who we are as a country. I believe you are doing that because you love this country. And I believe history will show that you are a true profile in courage at this moment in time in the history of our country, and I thank you.
Senator Kennedy now, so proceed, Ms. Mitchell.
Dr. Ford, we're almost done. Thank you. Just a couple cleanup questions. First of all, which of your two lawyers did Senator Feinstein's office recommend?
The Katz.
I'm sorry?
The Katz firm.
Okay. And when you did leave that night, did Leland Kaiser, now Kaiser, ever follow up with you and say, hey, what happened to you?
I've had communications with her recently.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about like the next day.
Oh, no. She didn't know about the event. She was downstairs during the event, and I did not share it with her.
Have you been, are you aware that the three people at the party besides yourself and Brett Kavanaugh have given statements under penalty of felony to the committee?
Yes.
And are you aware of what those statements say?
Yes.
Are you aware that they say that they have no memory or knowledge of such a party?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any particular motives to ascribe to Leland?
I guess we could take those one at a time. Leland has significant health challenges, and I'm happy that she's focusing on herself and getting the health treatment that she needs. And she let me know that she needed her lawyer to take care of this for her, and she texted me right afterward with an apology and good wishes and etc. So I'm glad that she's taking care of herself. I don't expect that PJ and Leland would remember this evening. It was a very unremarkable party. It was not one of their more notorious parties because nothing remarkable happened to them that evening. They were downstairs. And Mr. Judge is a different story. I would expect that he would remember that this happened.
Understood. Senator Harris just questioned you from the Maricopa County Protocol on Sexual Assault. That's the paper she was holding up. Are you aware that, and you know, I've been really impressed today because you've talked about norepinephrine and cortisol and what we call in the profession basically the neurobiological effects of trauma. Have you also educated yourself on the best way to get to memory and truth in terms of interviewing victims of trauma?
For me, interviewing victims of trauma?
No, the best way to do it, the best practices for interviewing victims of trauma.
No.
Okay. Would you believe me if I told you that there's no study that says that this setting in 5-minute increments is the best way to do that?
We'll stipulate for that.
We can stipulate. Thank you, counsel.
Agreed.
Did you know that the best way to do it is to have a trained interviewer talk to you one-on-one in a private setting and to let you do the talking, just let you do a narrative. Did you know that?
That makes a lot of sense.
Does make a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yes.
And then to follow up, obviously to fill in the details and ask for clarification. Does that make sense as well?
Yes.
And the research is done by a lot of people in the child abuse field. Two of the more prominent ones in the sexual assault field are Giesel and Fisher, who've talked about it. And it's called a cognitive interview. This is not a cognitive interview. Did anybody ever advise you from Senator Feinstein's office or from Representative Eshu's office to go get a forensic interview?
No.
Instead, you were advised to get an attorney and take a polygraph. Is that right?
Many people advised me to get an attorney. Once I had an attorney, my attorney and I discussed using the polygraph.
And instead of submitting to an interview in California, we're having a hearing here today in 5-minute increments. Is that right?
I agree that's what was agreed upon by the collegial group here.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, I have something to submit for the record. We received 3 statements under penalty of felony from 3 witnesses identified by Dr. Ford, Mark Judge, Leland Kaiser, and Patrick Smith. All 3 denied any knowledge of the incident or gathering described by Dr. Ford. Without objection, I'll enter in the record.
Mr. Chairman, I have something for the record as well. A number of letters from the witness's family, friends, including her husband.
Okay. I'll get to you just as soon as the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 letters addressed to both you and the ranking member, and I'd ask that they be entered into the record.
Without objection.
And it's also my understanding that Mr. Judge is not willing to come forward to answer our questions. As a result, we cannot test his memory or make any assessment of his thoughtfulness or character. And I think that's why the failure to call him to testify is so very critical. And I hope the majority would reconsider that.
Senator Blumenthal.
Mr. Chairman, I ask if you have sworn statements that you're submitting for the record, that we have those individuals come before us so that we can ask them questions about those statements. I think that the nature of this proceeding would be compromised if we lack an opportunity to ask them questions about sworn statements that will be part of the record. So, frankly, Mr. Chairman, I would object to entering them in the record.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Whitehouse.
I have a number of letters that I would like to ask submitted to the record that relate to the importance of proper investigation by trained professionals in pulling these kind of investigations together, from the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the National Women's Law Center, the National Organization for Women, and so forth.
Without objection, Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for our chairman. The statements that Senator Blumenthal talked about, those were statements taken by our majority staff.
They're already in the record.
Yes, sir, but those statements were taken by our majority staff?
Yes.
Did minority staff participate?
No.
Why not?
You'll have to ask them.
Well, were they instructed not to participate?
No.
They chose not to?
That's right.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
and if I could, I still think I have the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Let's listen to Senator Feinstein.
Can we be excused?
I am
the witness is quite tired.
I'd like to, if you'd wait just a minute, I'd like to thank Dr. Ford.
All right.
In fact, we're going to continue this meeting, and we can, so let's just be nice to her. Dr. Ford, I can only speak as one of 21 senators here, but I thank you very much for your testimony. More importantly, for your bravery coming out and trying to answer our questions as best you could remember. Thank you very much. We'll adjourn for 45 minutes. Not adjourn, recess for 45 minutes.
The questioning is done. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, Senator Grassley ending on a gracious note, thanking her for her courage coming forward, something that's been echoed by Democrats throughout their questioning of Dr. Blasey Ford. There you see the questioner, Rachel Mitchell,